Never go to the second location. Always trust your gut.
Hello, my name is Chrissy Champagne. You are listening to Residue, a true crime podcast dedicated to keeping you paranoid. Residue is not just another true crime podcast, but a necessary tool for those who want to understand the dangers lurking in the real world. Residue is created, hosted, edited, researched, and produced by me, Chrissy Champagne. So for the next few weeks, we are going to try and focus on those made-for-television films that we all loved from the 80s and 90s, the ones that were actually based on true stories. But let's get down to some business before we begin this week's episode. Follow your heart and see where it takes you. Right to that follow button is where it should take you. You should follow your heart straight to the follow button on my podcast page. Thank you. I just learned that song 4 seconds ago. So there you go. You're welcome. And also, as you know, the best thing you can do for any podcast that you love is leave a 5-star review. This helps me know that I am giving you what you want. I mean, there are also options to leave comments on the Spotify site. So if you see an episode on Spotify, there's an option to comment underneath that episode, and I am able to respond to you there. You can also follow me at Instagram Residue Podcast, Facebook Residue A True Crime Podcast, or TikTok Residue Podcast, or at Residue A True Crime Pod. Whew, thank you. A huge thank you to everyone that has been sending me DMs, writing these spectacular reviews. You have no idea how much it means when I spend so much time on this podcast. I put all of me, my whole heart into this project, and to hear these things back from you it's everything. That's all. You're going to make me cry before I even get started on this horrific case that we are talking about today. You guys kept asking for it. And like I said, we're going to start focusing on some made-for-TV movies. We're going to start doing some Hollywood movies, everything based on a true crime. And today we're going to be talking about the movie that had 2 different names. Now, it was called Swearing Allegiance, but it was also called Love's Deadly Triangle, the Texas Cadet Murder, and this is the story of Adrianne Jones. Along with the made-for-television film, there was also a book called Blind Love, the True Story of the Texas Cadet Murder by Peter Meyer, and that was used as my main source for today's story. So, before we begin, you guys, you know that I have to warn you, listener discretion is advised. Love's Deadly Triangle, the Texas Cadet Murder is a made-for-TV movie that originally aired in 1997 on NBC. It is based on a true crime story that shocked the United States in the mid-1990s. This is the story of the real-life murder of Adrianne Jones in Texas in 1995. The film dramatizes the events surrounding the murder of 16-year-old Adrianne Jones by 2 high school students, David Graham and Diane Zamora, who were both aspiring to attend military academies. The pair were passionate and obsessive. They were in this relationship that was very toxic, and the crime was allegedly driven by jealousy and a twisted sense of loyalty. The film received many mixed reviews. It was considered sensationalistic by some critics, but it was praised by others for shedding light on a disturbing true story. It aired just 2 years after the actual murder, which sparked some controversy about whether it was too soon to dramatize this tragedy. And the case drew national media attention because of the young ages of those involved, their promising futures, and the brutal nature of this crime. The made-for-television film was based on one of the confessions of the killers. And although the movie stuck very close to the actual events, I am here to tell you the true story of Adrianne Jones, David Graham, and Diane Zamora. On the morning of December 4th, 1995, Gary Foster was driving away from his 16 1/3 acres of land where he and his wife had built their dream home in Texas. Gary's driving down his long gravel driveway on his way to work. He just turns around to glance and appreciate everything he has worked hard for in his life, his home, his land. And that is when he sees a figure slumped over in the grass. Looks to be a human figure, but Gary's a little cautious. Stay paranoid. Gary thinks, I don't know, this could be a trick. He had a lot of land. There were known vandals to be roaming this area. So much so that he didn't even like his son to stand outside and wait for the bus. He would have his wife drive him to the bus stop and wait with his son. So Gary took caution and he thought, okay, I'll drive up closer to it. I will knock it out of my car. And as he gets a little closer, he notices that this is a human figure. Gary sees a woman lying on her back and he says she looked as if she had simply lay down to take in the sweet sky on a fragrant summer's afternoon. She was tagged Jane Doe, case number 954705T. She was wearing white socks, blue and green plaid flannel shorts, a white Nike brand long-sleeved knit shirt over a gray t-shirt bearing the logo UIL Region 1 Cross Country Regionals 1995. There were 2 bullet wounds to the head, one right between her eyes. It was as if she had been executed. There was also a huge gash on the side of her head and large amounts of blood soaking her long blonde hair. There were bruises on her neck, which indicated that she had clearly been struggling with someone who had their hands around her neck. Her clothes were not disturbed in a way that would have suggested a sexual assault. The knuckles on her left hand were bruised and bloodied as if she had put up quite the fight. That very same morning, Linda Jones in nearby Mansfield was frantic when she realized that her 16-year-old daughter, Adrianne Jones, wasn't in her bedroom that morning. Adrianne Jones, or AJ, as she was known to all of her close friends and family, was a 16-year-old girl, and her favorite bands were Pearl Jam, Annie Lennox, 2 Unlimited, which was a techno rave band. AJ was an honor student. She took advanced courses. She was planning to go to Texas A&M. She studied at least 2 hours every single night. She was a free spirit, and she knew how to put a smile on everyone's face. She was the kind of girl who was friendly to everyone in the school hallways. And AJ's father, Bill Jones, moved his family from Dallas to Mansfield for a safer place to raise his children, which is devastating when we find out what happened. And her father was a heavy equipment mechanic and her mother, Linda, a massage therapist. They were aware of their teen daughter's growing independence and they didn't let their guard down often. So to realize that AJ was missing that morning, it was a shock. Just the day before, AJ hung out with her mom, Linda, at the gym. And while they were driving home that night, they discussed AJ's career goals. And she said, Mom, I want to be able to determine how people act. What is that called? I want to know why people do what they do. Her mom tells her that is called a behavioral analyst. And AJ says to her, well, you know what? That's what I want to be. I find this absolutely mind-blowing that Adrianne wanted to be somebody that tries to figure out why people do what they do. Because we are going to spend this entire episode trying to figure out why David and Diane did what they did. Adrianne was a star athlete and her love was soccer, but a knee injury forced her off the soccer team, so instead she joined the cross country, the track team. And this is where Adrianne would meet David Graham. The night before Adrianne Jones goes missing, she is at home around 10:30 p.m. with her family and the phone rings. Adrianne picks up the phone, but her mother is really upset because her mother wants her to get in bed. She has a long school day the next morning. But Adrianne's like, Mom, just give me a minute. And her mom says, who are you on the phone with? And she says, David. David Graham was a tall, blonde, muscular, good-looking senior from Mansfield High, and girls from the high school recalled that David was like the perfect gentleman. One girl even said he was one of the last cool guys on earth. It's so funny how we can misjudge people and have no idea. They also said that he was funny, but not overly talkative. He was an amazing student. He also ran on the track team. And now we're in Texas. This is football country. But David didn't play football. The football players were like, the stars of the high school. David tried to play football for about a year, but he said it was too painful. So he joined the cross country team. And in this town, the cross country team, they weren't as, celebrated as the football players, but they were still fantastic athletes. So David was a little, he ran a little under the radar, meaning he wasn't popular, but he was still respected. And kids in school would sarcastically address him as Colonel Graham because he was dependable. He was courteous, businesslike. He said yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. David had his pilot's license by age 14. Now, this guy, he was determined. He wanted to join the American equivalent of the British Special Air Services. This is the elite of the elite in counterterrorism. And David always talked about how someday he would be flying. David had a best friend named Jay Green, and these two were very similar because their whole lives were about the military. They were both determined to be in the military, and at age 16, they actually met at the Civil Air Patrol. Now, David and his best friend Jay had always been super tight, but that is until, and Jay says this, that David returned from a week-long trip to Ottawa. And this trip was for a week-long international cadet program that David wanted to attend. And at this program, he tells his best friend Jay that he met this Australian Air Force cadet named Helen. And they hung out for weeks. They could talk about everything with each other. They sort of fell in love, It always reminds me of Grease, Sandy, and Danny. While at this week-long international retreat, David loses his virginity to Helen, and he is obsessed with her. He returns home, and it's all he can talk about. And Jay's getting a little annoyed by it. He's like, it's all David ever talked about was this Helen girl. And Jay convinces him that, David, you're not going to be able to hold down a relationship with this girl who's in a completely different country than you, and you're only 17. He basically says to his best friend, why don't you just find someone that lives closer to you? And that is exactly what David Graham did. And now we will learn about his fiance. Yes, they were engaged at 17 years old. His fiance, 17-year-old Diane Zamora. Diane, only a few months younger than David, already knew what she wanted to be when she grew up by age 9, because on January 28, 1986, Diane witnessed the Challenger explode, killing teacher Krista McAuliffe and 6 astronauts. And from that moment, at age 9, Diane knew she wanted to be an astronaut. She announced it to her family, and then she worked her ass off to make that dream achievable. She wrote to NASA, she asked for brochures, and she found out that attending the Air Force Academy was the best way, the surefire way to get herself into space. At age 13, she joined the Civil Air Patrol, which was the closest thing to astronaut training that there was for a 13-year-old girl in Fort Worth, Texas. She was bright, dedicated, she was always studying. Diane also joined the Civil Air Patrol at age 13, and she was acting as a part-time mom for her younger sister and brothers at this time because her mom was trying to get her nursing license. And Diane's father was also having an affair. So at only age 13, Diane is taking on a lot. Diane states that she went into the Civil Air Patrol thinking that this was just going to be like the Girl Scouts. And she said that it wasn't. As it turned out, the Civil Air Patrol had more in common with the Green Berets than the Girl Scouts. And Diane, who was just 13 years old, she was still an independent-minded child as she was disciplined and she was not excited to be taking orders from somebody else. I mean, at this point in her family unit, she's actually taking care of her brothers and sisters. And when she joined this Civil Air Patrol, she did not like when people told her what to do. Diane was often belligerent at these Civil Air Patrol CAP meetings, and One time an officer said to her, "Why do you even come here if you're not going to follow the rules?" And Diane said, "Because I want to be an astronaut." So after a little while, David Graham actually becomes Diane Zamora's superior. And now he's the one that has to be giving her orders. And under the direction of David Graham, Diane Zamora softened a little bit. Highly looked down upon for a senior officer to be having any kind of relationship with someone that is below him. And all of David's friends thought that this was really stupid. They didn't like the idea that David was starting to get interested in Diane, and they were telling him that it was really unprofessional, and this is something that he should definitely stay away from. Yeah, these two didn't listen. They just kept it going. They actually became so obsessed with each other. They started bonding over, their love for the military and their goals and their dreams, but they also bonded over the fact that David's mother left the family. And now David was just living alone with his father, and Diane's father was having an affair. So their families were falling apart, and these two just found comfort in each other. These two teenage lovebirds, they even invented their own way of saying I love you. They would say greenish brown female sheep, and this is a little wordplay meant to mean I love you. For the greenish brown is olive, I love, and you is a ewe, a female sheep. It's pretty fucking ridiculous, but teenagers. And now watching her parents' marriage fall apart because of infidelity, Diane swore she would not have sex until she was married. She would lose her virginity on her wedding night. But of course, David, being a teenage boy, talked her right out of that and promised that they would be engaged. Diane immediately regrets her decision to have sex with David. She tells her mother that she wishes she could do it over again. And she actually says, if I can't be Mrs. David Graham, then I will die, Diane Zamora. So David's friends think that this is ridiculous, and they're noticing that David is starting to become a different person. He's not as well put together as he used to be. He's letting his hair grow longer, and he is constantly talking about being engaged to his high school sweetheart. Even at their ROTC meetings, when they would have to stand up and talk about current events, David would say, "My current event is that I am engaged to Diane Zamora." So these two are so determined and disciplined that David and Diana come up with a plan. They're now engaged and they're going to set their wedding date. It's 1995, but their wedding date is going to be set for August 13th, 2000. And this is after they both graduate from their academies. The whole wedding was planned. They were going to charter a bus to carry their relatives in Texas to the famous Cadet Chapel on the Air Force Academy campus. And there David would wear his uniform, Diane would wear a white wedding dress, and at the end of the ceremony, they would walk under crossed swords held by other cadets. And all of this sounds so dreamy, right? These two have their entire future planned until a moment that the two are sitting down studying, and David turns to Diane and he says, "I have something to tell you." David looks at Diane and he says, "You haven't been the only girl in my life. I have had sex with someone else before." And Diane is startled. Okay, I'm just sitting here trying to study, but okay. And she was like, "What do you mean? You mean you weren't a virgin when we met?" And he says, "No, I was a virgin when we met." And then that makes Diane just lose her damn mind. Meaning, okay, so you were a virgin when we met, which was a lie because he had sex with a girl from Ottawa, but she doesn't even know that. But she says in her mind, she's like, "Oh my God, this means that you had sex with someone while we've been together." I mean, these two haven't really been together that long. David tells Diane that he had sex with a girl from the cross-country team. He says that her name is Adrianne, and this was a one-time sexual encounter. And then Diane loses her damn mind. Diane is flipping out. She immediately grabs a fireplace poker. She is whipping David with it. She starts banging her head on the ground so much. She's saying that she wants to crack her own skull open. She's just screaming. As she's banging her head, she's screaming, "Kill her. kill her. David saying that she screamed so hard and so long that he didn't even know this was actually possible for a human being to do. This is November 1995. This is only a couple of days before Adrianne Jones's body is found. David says that to Diane, this wasn't just about jealousy. This was about betrayal, about being deceived, about forgetting every single thing that they talked about, what they meant to each other. And I gotta be honest, I feel like Diane is pulling in also a little bit of the fact that her father has betrayed her entire family. And that's a lot that she has inside of her. And now her boyfriend, her best friend, the man she thought she was going to marry, has also betrayed her. She's losing it. Nothing that David could do would calm Diane down in this moment, and she kept begging him to kill her. And David was like, what? That seems like a weird request, but okay, sure. Let's kill her. And he completely agrees to this plan. And so on December 3rd, 1995 at 10:30 p.m., David calls Adrianne Jones and arranges to meet her at 1 a.m. under the guise that he is just really stressed out. He's in a lot of trouble and he really needs someone to talk to. And Adrianne agrees. So Adrianne sneaks out of her bedroom window to meet David Graham. David and Diane pack a book bag full of weights and a gun, and their plan was to break her neck and sink her to the bottom of the lake. And they were going to drive out to Joe Pool Lake. This is a recreational park. It includes a number of paved boat ramps, parking lots, public swimming areas, and Joe Pool Lake was also very close to Gary Foster's home that we spoke about in the beginning. I mean, their plan seemed easy enough to them. Get Adrianne in the car, break her neck, put her in the lake, tie the weights to her. The weights will hold her down. No one will ever know. They get Adrianne in the car, and it's just David and Adrianne, and they drive out to this secluded spot so that David can discuss why he's so depressed with Adrianne. But when they pull up to the spot, David immediately just starts grabbing Adrianne's neck. He's immediately in attack mode, and Adrianne's like, what are you doing? Like, she's completely dumbfounded. She's struggling to get away from him. He has his hands wrapped around her neck. He's trying to break her neck, but he's finding that it isn't as easy as it looks in the movies. He can't break her neck. And while he's trying, he screams, Diane, I can't do it. And then all of a sudden, Diane, like a creeper, is just sitting in the back, jumps out. Adrianne has no idea this girl has been hiding in the hatchback and has now crawled to the back seat and is now behind Adrianne. You have to remember that they went to different high schools. Adrianne doesn't know who the hell Diane is, and she barely knows David. I mean, they've hung out a couple times. So she's like, what's going on? I mean, she can't comprehend the situation. Diane picks up one of the weights from the back seat and she takes it and she is slamming it into Adrianne's head, and she hits her pretty hard. I mean, Adrianne's almost knocked out, but Adrianne manages in her determination to get away. She just is able to crawl out of the car window. She slithers out of the car window. She lands on the ground and she is getting up and she is trying to get away from them. But she has been hit so hard in the head. She staggers over to this barbed wire fence and she is able to get over the fence and she lands on the ground. David walks up to her and he stands over her and he notices that she's kind of out of it, but she is not dying. So he goes back to the car and he tells Diane, I don't know what to do. She's not dead. And Diane says, kill her. David gets the gun. He goes back and he shoots Adrianne twice in the head. David rushes back to Diane in the car. They hug. They say, I love you. David gets in. He starts to drive away. And then Diane looks at him and says, I don't think we should have done that. After Adrianne's body was found, her mother, Linda, does tell police that the night before she went missing, her phone rang and her mother asked her who was on the phone, and she said David from cross country. So immediately, the next morning when Adrianne is found, police go and find David. Now they look through Adrianne's telephone book. They call every single David. And of course, there's only one David on the cross country team, so police do talk to David Graham. And he denies any knowledge of anything that happened. He even denies that he called Adrianne. There would be absolutely no reason to suspect David Graham, and especially Diane Zamora. She went to a completely different school. Adrianne didn't even know her. So David slides right under the radar. And 11 days after Adrianne's murder, there is a suspect that police arrest, and his name is Brian McMillan. And Brian is only 17 years old. He's held for 3 weeks in this jail cell, and he is pressured into confessing something that he didn't do. But police had no evidence against Brian. He even passed a polygraph test. He had really no alibi for the night that Adrianne went missing. Now, Brian was known to have a crush on Adrianne. This is why some people did suspect him, I guess to the point where even when Adrianne would be at work at her fast food restaurant job, she would hide behind the counter when she saw Brian coming in. Brian had a crush and he was a little creepy. But police had nothing to go on except for that. And Brian's parents lost their shit. They were like, let our son go, release him. And his family ended up suing the city of Grand Prairie and the police. And they settled out of court and they won an undisclosed amount. Now, people now had absolutely no idea who else to suspect. But that is until Diane Zamora couldn't keep her mouth shut. It is very likely that the Adrianne Jones murder could have been a cold case to this day, if not for what Diane did. While Adrianne's case is going cold, police have no suspects, David and Diane go on enjoying life. Like, they've gotten rid of their problem. Now they can just enjoy each other. They start going to each other's proms. They're graduating high school. Diane gets accepted into the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. And David is attending the Air Force Academy in Colorado. And these two are still maintaining a relationship. And they're in love. And they're still engaged. And everyone knows it. 18-year-old Diane Zamora confided in her roommates at the U.S. Naval Academy that her and David killed a girl in their hometown. She told them that they are devoted to each other, they will never let anything come between them, and she knows this because they did something together that they can never take back, and tells these girls about Adrianne. She doesn't say Adrianne's name, but she says, we killed her. It's over. She'll never come between us again. And I mean, they are in the U.S. Naval Academy. They are held to the highest standard of always reporting anything that they hear. If they know someone is doing something wrong, they have to support or report to their superiors. And so the roommate that Diane said this to immediately goes to her superiors. And she was like, listen, Diane just told me something absolutely crazy. We have to check out her hometown and see if there's anything about a young high school girl that was murdered. And is this case still unsolved? It's also just crazy to think about why Diane decided to confide in them. I don't know. And when you watch the made-for-TV movie, they really do make it seem as though Diane has been through hell in this academy and she's just worn out. She's worn down. She's tired. And they make the scene seem as if she didn't even really realize what she was saying. And immediately after she tells her roommates in that scene, she falls asleep. Of course, the next day, Diane is pulled into the Naval Academy office and detectives are there. And they're asking her, why did you say this? And she said, well, I made it up. And detectives don't believe her. But at this point, the Naval Academy requests that Diane take a leave. Diane packs up her stuff, she gets on a plane, she flies to Colorado Springs on August 31st, 1996, and she spends some time with David. She tells him that she told her roommates about this, and David is like, why would you do this, But now detectives are there to see David. So it is September 4th, 1996, and David tells the police that he knows nothing. Nothing at all. He doesn't know what Diane is even talking about. But then they have David take a polygraph, and David fails. So it's about 2 days of interrogation for David, and he has no lawyer. He's 18 years old, and he gives a statement. He finally breaks down, and he says, you know what? Okay, I admit it. We killed Adrianne. I'll give you a statement. Just hand me a typewriter. I'll type it up for you. And David sits there and he types what detectives referred to as a Danielle Steele novel. And it is 4.5 pages long. And I want to read some of that to you. It was November 4, and I was giving a friend a ride home late one night after returning from a cross-country meet in Lubbock, Texas. Adrianne surprised me by asking me to take some turns that I knew were out of the way, and after being directed onto a dark path behind an old elementary school, I parked the car. The events that followed are not pleasing for me to relate as they go completely against the moral background I have grown to appreciate. There were sexual activities, short-lived and hardly appreciated. I did willingly concede to the girl in these actions, but I knew they were wrong. Never before had I participated in anything so meaningless and painful. Painful, that is, because I was letting down the one person I had swore to be faithful to. The love we share would never be broken, and no one would ever come between us. No one, that is, except for that one girl that had stolen from us our purity. I can never hold anything from Diane, nor she from me. She knew in my eyes that something was wrong the moment I decided to confess. When I did tell her, I thought the very life in her had been torn away. She was angry, she was violent, and she was broken. For at least an hour, she screamed sobs that I wouldn't have thought possible. It wasn't just jealousy. For Diane, she had been betrayed, deceived, and forgotten, all in that one meaningless instant in November. The purity which she had held so dear had been tainted. Diane had always held her virginity as one of her highest virtues. When we agreed to be married, she finally let her guard down long enough for our teenage hormones to kick in. When this precious relationship we had was damaged by my thoughtless actions, the only thing that could satisfy her womanly vengeance, my goodness, was the life of the one that had for an instant taken her place. Diane's parents had similar problems in the relationship. She knew her father had often cheated on her mother. Diane didn't want Adrianne to be the same woman for me that her father had in his affair. The request of Adrianne's life was not for a second taken lightly by me. I couldn't even believe that she would ask that of me. Well, Diane's beautiful eyes have always played the strings of my heart effortlessly. I couldn't imagine life without her. Not for a second did I want to lose her. I didn't have any harsh feelings for Adrianne, but no one could stand between me and Diane. I was totally in love with her and always will be. I regret it now, for never did I imagine the heartache it would cause my school, my friends, Adrianne's family, or even my community. I guess I just shut it all out of my mind in that instant when I convinced myself that Diane was even worth murder. The plan was to call Adrianne and convince her to come out to my car, and that worked. The plan was to drive her out near Joe Pool Lake, and that worked. The plan was to, and this is not easy for me to confess, but break her young neck and sink her to the bottom of the lake with the weights that ended up being used to hit her in the head. That didn't work. Diane was hidden in the back of the car. It was late. And on that morning of December 4th, 1995, I realized that all those quick, painless snaps, even in the movies, were just your usual Hollywood stunts. The quick and painless crime turned into something that basically scared the shit out of Diane and I, and we realized that it was either her or us. Diane struck her in the back of the head with one of the weights while I held her. I could see in Diane's eyes that she was confused and scared. She was first acting out of passionate rage, but now she was fighting from instinct. Adrianne somehow crawled through the window, and to our horror, she ran off. I was panicky and just grabbed the 9mm to follow, and to our relief, at that time, she was too injured from the head wounds to escape. I just wanted it to be a dream. We took the quickest route to I-20, where we decided to head to a well-trusted friend's home, John J. Green. He did exactly as I suspected, allowed us through his window, the usual entrance to his place in his room, and he allowed us to clean up and collect our wits and even loaned me a pair of shorts. My clothing had blood stains on them, and we disposed of them in a dumpster near Diane's house. We then went back to Diane's house, where we cleaned out the car and went to sleep by the fire. The next day, we returned the weights to my house. Never had I imagined so much guilt. They announced it on the intercom. Adrianne's passing. My friends talked about it in the halls. Everywhere I turned, someone was crying or just staring in shock for reasons I alone was the cause of. I saw Adrianne's mother in the grocery stores. I read articles of how her family was coping in the papers. One thing in particular has haunted me constantly for the past 8 months. I read a quote from Linda Jones in which she said, "I hope that killer is out there and that he is just being eaten up with guilt." Now, this confession letter goes on, and when you read it, it is a lot of me, us, Diane, David, what I felt, what I feel now. There's a couple things in there that are concerning. Joseph, whatever his name was, Green, who told nobody that these two snuck in his window on the same night that he finds out somebody in his high school was murdered. He tells nobody that they showed up in bloody clothes, that Diane was a wreck and whimpering. That's concerning. And this is like the kind of situation where we are thankful for the roommate in the Naval Academy who didn't pull a Jay Green and say nothing. She was like, hell no, I'm telling someone right now. And the way David writes and describes how he was going to kill Adrianne, he writes break her young neck. I'm sorry, David Graham is a creep. And I just can't. The way he writes, the way he speaks, the way he behaves. So after David confesses, he is immediately arrested for murder and awaiting extradition to Texas. The police go to his home. They do find the guns and the weights in his parents' attic hidden in the insulation. Now they go to arrest Diane. She is at her grandparents' house in Fort Worth, Texas. And when they get to her, she acts surprised, but she doesn't have any outbursts. She's very quiet. Now, Diane spent the night in the Grand Prairie jail, and she was charged with murder, held on $250,000 bail. She has shown David's confession while she is in jail, and they ask, do you want to tell your side of the story? And she says, yes, of course, but it is actually basically almost the same story. She recalled that David confessed his infidelity, and she said her own father cheated on her mom, so she felt like she'd been scorned and she wanted to get even. The trial begins September 1996, and the media just explodes over this love triangle. And this is in February 1997 when the movie is aired. This movie, like I said earlier, is based on David's confession. So, during trial, David and Diane are in separate cells but the same jail, and they faithfully wrote each other love letters. I'm going to read you little pieces of a love letter that David wrote Diane. It's so gross to me. Okay. He wrote, I miss you like I miss ice cream. You both are rich and creamy. Sweet and ice cold. Oh God, so gross. Tasty and bad for you. And then Diane writes back, when will my love come find me? When will I get to walk out of these bars for good? I just wish I had a remote control for time. That would rock. My fucking Lord, with these two. I miss you like ice cream. Rich and creamy. Oh, you guys, I'm so grossed out. January 1998, Diane's trial is in Fort Worth, Texas, and the judge allowed the trial to be televised. Diane's confession was the cornerstone of the case, and the prosecution called many witnesses. Diane had made confessions to people, and it wasn't just the roommates in the Naval Academy. So Diane told some friends that David was abusive, and she also told her best friend, Christina Mason, that David had sex with a girl and that they planned to murder her. And this best friend, Christina Mason, gets on the stand and she says, yeah, Diane confessed this to me. They also called David's friend, Jay Green, to the stand, and he confessed that, yeah, the couple came to his house on the night of the murder, and he did say that David was holding Diane and she was whimpering. And then they also had a classmate come up and testify that Diane told him that if she ever cheated on David, that she would do the same thing he did for her, that she would have to kill. So Diane's roommate, Jennifer McIerney, she's the one that told on her in the Naval Academy. She said that Diane said that Adrianne was promiscuous. I'm going to use that word. I'm not going to use the words that Diane was saying about Adrianne. And she also said that she attended Adrianne's funeral and she did feel bad in that moment because she saw Adrianne's parents and they were devastated. And that was the only time that Diane showed any remorse. So one of the biggest pieces of evidence in Diane's trial was her day planner. Now, Diane was just this dedicated day planner girl. She wrote down every single thing she did. And Diane wrote down the day she murders Adrianne. She circles December 4th, and in that little spot, it reads, Adrianne, 1:38 a.m. And this is the exact time that the medical examiner said that Adrianne's time of death was. So Diane's defense team argues that her confession is given under duress because she's just protecting herself from David. Now, David is this controlling, abusive asshole. Diane's flipping her shit right on David. They're not in love anymore, you guys. This isn't a match made in heaven anymore. Diane is flipping. She says that David wanted to call her kitten and he would be a tiger, and this is indicative of the relationship that they actually had. He was controlling and she just had to do whatever he said. And in classic narcissistic behavior, Diane is put on the stand. And she contradicted her own sworn statements while on the stand. And during her testimony, Diane says that David killed Adrianne and then dragged her body to the car and said, "Look at what you made me do." Then she was asked, "Did you ever ask David to kill Adrianne for you?" And Diane says no. And while she's saying this, she's crying. She's got those forced tears. I mean, I don't know why anyone thinks they can fake it anymore. We can see through that shit now. What were you doing? She starts to pretend like she's so devastated. You know that cry, you've all seen it. But then, very quickly, her demeanor changes. When she's asked questions about her best friend, Christina Mason, her demeanor changes. She's now this cold, evil bitch. And she's so arrogant on the stand. She's just like so unsuccessfully trying to portray herself as this abused, meek girl. But then when the prosecution asks certain questions about, like, you know, how do you feel about your best friend testifying against you? She just says stuff like, Christina Mason is a liar. And she's got this like cold, evil, like Disney ice queen look. Like, it's almost like, to me, when you watch it, like she just wanted to look tough. Just like probably not the time to be acting like queen bitch right now. Okay? But yeah, you know, a jury sees right through that. And on February 17th, after only 6 hours of deliberation, Diane Zamora is found guilty of capital murder, and she is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Now, for David's trial, they're going to appoint a new judge, and they're going to move this trial to New Braunfels, Texas. This is when David turns on Diane, because he's like, you know what? I'm just going to save myself. That bitch turned on me. I'm about to turn on her. So July 1998, his trial begins. He's now 20 years old. He broke off his engagement to Diane. And David's defense team says that Diane was solely responsible. He wasn't even at the scene of the crime, you guys. They want the jury to believe this. There's no physical evidence that puts David there. There's just his confession and the statements he made. But the defense tries to argue that David only made that Danielle Steele novel confession 4.5 pages long because he was coerced into doing it. They were being mean to him, so he had to write a 4.5 page novel. So David's defense is saying that he only agreed to confess because he promised Diane that he would always protect her because Diane committed this entire murder on her own. David was of no help at all. He wasn't even there. The only problem is he's never able to present a clear alibi. He will never say where he was. Still, to this day. I mean, he's arrogant. David is so arrogant. They say that he was smirking during the entire trial. Not even smiling, just a smirk. And now the key piece of evidence in his trial was going to be the murder weapon. David says in an interview with American Justice that he only hid this murder weapon for Diane. And I just feel like it gets to the point where you can't believe anything David says anymore because he's always flip-flopping. And this part is going to be the part where you're going to want to take whatever device you're listening to me on right now, and you're going to want to throw it against the wall, break it into pieces, because here comes another one of David's newest confessions, you guys. He lied about Adrianne. Just give you a little minute to process that for a minute. David lied about having sex with Adrianne Jones. On July 15th, Adrianne's trackmate and friend takes the stand, and she testifies that she drove Adrianne home the night that David says he drove Adrianne home and had sexual relations with her. David never drove Adrianne home, and David never had sex with Adrianne. David barely knew Adrianne. They were not more than just acquaintances. And another just sickening part of this whole case is that the media portrayed Adrianne as this flaky, just promiscuous high school girl. And that's all we really knew about her. And that is completely untrue. Adrianne liked Pearl Jam. Adrianne liked Annie Lennox. Adrianne wanted to be a behavioral analyst. Adrianne had dreams and goals and friends and family who adored her, and for no reason at all, she was taken off of this earth. And by two people who lived in their own little world, and then they went on living their lives like nothing ever happened. David doesn't take the stand in his own defense, and on July 24th, after only 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found David guilty. He was also given a life sentence. And the motive? Nobody knows. David spoke with American Justice, and this is what he said. This situation got me away from Diane. This was worth losing my dream over. Me, me, me. That's all I ever hear when I read something that David says is me. And he calls it this situation. David goes on to say, I feel forgiveness is something that God gives anyone as soon as they ask. And a lot of people, the Jones family, the prosecutors, people like you, people that know about this case, whether or not I'm guilty, they don't want to forgive me. They want me to suffer the rest of my life. Yes, David, you've got that one correct. So let's talk about Diane. Diane is still studying in prison, and Diane tried to appeal. The judge threw it down. She said no. There was some new evidence, something about two people were going to come forward and say that David did actually drive Adrianne home or something like that, but the judge was like, nah, you're staying in jail. I did also read that Diane got married. She met a guy named Stephen Mora. He was a fellow Texas inmate. They talked through the mail. I guess this guy had committed auto theft and burglary and was in prison for threatening someone related to one of these cases. And although they never met in person, the two did decide to get married, and they got a marriage license in 2003. I mean, she got married. It almost makes you think like high school, all that bullshit, all that I love you, losing virginity. It's kind of all just nonsense, right? Yeah. Life goes on. Could have just moved on. Hey, your boyfriend cheated on you? Okay, let's break up. The end. That's where it should have stopped. In November 2002, David yet again changed his story and admitted that he did kill Adrianne Jones to prove his ultimate devotion to his jealous girlfriend. David said, "I really believe that Adrianne Jones died for a reason." Adrianne's mother said that she will never speak to David or Diane. She said, "They're where they belong. Nothing they will ever say can change what is a fact. Adrianne Jones died by their hands, by their callous thinking on December 4th, 1995, and she's a box of ashes waiting to be buried, and that's all I have left of my baby." Thank you so much for joining me again this week on Residue, and I hope you all stay safe and stay paranoid.